Okay, it is 6 p.m. here. My name is Jacob Meyer, and I'm here tonight to talk about how we all are navigating these 2020 holidays. This is a very, very difficult holiday season we're all going through, and we just thought it'd be good at Integrated Health Systems to be able to have a bit of a discussion about, how do we navigate these extra complications? How do we grow our awareness? And, what upsets us about our family? How do we negotiate some of these things? But ultimately, how can we cultivate the relationships that we want to have? But before we get going on that, if you have a question here, we'll be able to I'll be able to ask them in between the slides. I like to keep this from about 30 to 40 minutes today, and just like this to be interactive as well. So any questions, pop them in the chat there. Oh, and I forgot as well in terms of putting the Calendly link. I will drop that in the chat right here. All right. Okay. We will get going here. My name is Jacob Meyer. I'm the therapist, the counseling therapist at Integrated Health Systems. I've been working there for a little bit now, and it's great to be a part of the team and to be a part of the approach there. And so we'll sort of get moving and talk a little bit more about me first. And so I got my sort of start in this field by working in addiction and trauma. My professional experience was in education before in Chicago, and that inspired me to become a therapist. I was never a teacher or anything like that, but I went to graduate school. I found I was good at just connecting with others and people in higher stress communities, and I felt like I really thrived in those environments. And so I figured, to learn and to utilize like the experience I had and learning about how to connect and understanding different dynamics within different communities, and taking that more to the individual level. I started by moving out here and worked in addiction up in Westminster at a methadone clinic there for about almost 3 years there, 2.5, 3 years, we could say. And so by getting my start in working in addiction, I've really, really had a lot of experience in working with a lot of complex trauma, working with severe addiction, opiate addiction, benzodiazepines, things of that nature, and a very, very high need clientele there. And that sort of helped me learn a good base in understanding human behavior, especially understanding human behavior while it's under stress, and having to create new behaviors and dynamics under stress as well. That role prepared me very, very much for IHS because stress is stress. The stress of addiction, the stress of dealing with developmental trauma, complex trauma, like just different levels of relational trauma, really, really come into the fold at IHS. We see a lot of autoimmune issues, chronic illnesses, traumatic brain injuries there. And so I've really been able to learn and then refine my approach in helping people that aren't dealing with, let's say, an issue that's just bothering them from the past. I see a lot of people that are dealing with this really big and interruptive stress, and that noise from the past that they used to be able to sort of keep tamped down and keep away, and they would expend energy in doing that. Man, they just don't have that energy anymore, and that can be very, very loud in their emotional system. And so I had a great base there, working in addiction and with a very high need population. And now I'm spending more of my time working in a more refined approach, in a different environment. But all of these same themes and principles sort of apply. And so what I love about integrated health systems as well is the integrated approach of the team to, I guess, be a little bit redundant there. I love working with Dr. Perry, Dr. Stedman, in terms of how can we have a holistic approach to the human being that's in front of us, and how can we sort of pick up where the other one leaves off. There are a lot of times that there will be a patient where they might be a little stumped in terms of some of the therapies that they're throwing at them, but then I can help them understand, without the detail aspect of it, that respecting the patient's privacy at all times. But help them understand that yes, there is a lot of stress underneath the surface here. Yes, this person is working through something and making a vital connection here, that does have a big energy cost, and that might interfere, or this might help them de-stress to this point where they're able to thrive in the other therapies as well. And so um, I've seen a lot of really amazing things where people are being hit in terms of like the metabolic side, the neuro side, the chiropractic side, the supplementation, and the counseling piece. When all these things are coming in and really focused in on that person, you really see a person be able to optimize and even push into a level of counseling that they didn't think was possible as well, and typically in a more abbreviated fashion as well. And so love the team approach there, love the environment there. And especially I love seeing just all these changes and radical changes that patients can undergo in as little as in as little as 6 short weeks. And so just a little bit about me here and introducing myself and what I do. I forgot to cover, my credentials, my LSW, like sort of just that general, what you would expect of a therapist in terms of general training and a master's level. But the licensed addiction counselor is more of a specialty in terms of um, being more specialized at the master's level in terms of treating addiction, and having experience doing so. And I'm also certified to do EMDR therapy, and I am working towards a full certification in EMDR training as well. And that is more advanced trauma reprocessing. Very, very high cost in terms of energy demand, in terms of the need of trust with the therapist and the patient. But what I tell people is like EMDR sort of picks up where talk therapy leaves off, and it's really able to help people move through some more difficult portions within themselves. And we're able to really sort of change a lot of these like sort of internal dynamics or schematics within someone to sort of unburden moving things from like the known into the felt state, and having people really feel a difference in their environment in pretty rapid succession there. And so that's just a little bit about me and my credentials as well. And sort of moving on to the meat of this presentation today, and it's sort of addressing this holiday season, understanding that this year, I've been talking about it on these webinars a lot, and this year COVID has sort of been in the air. And in terms of what I've been talking about, boy, we've seen a lot of anxiety, we've seen a lot of depression, we see rates of suicidality go up. We're seeing sort of this unprecedented event unfold in front of our eyes, and its uniqueness in that, there is simply no getting away from it. Every single person has been affected by it in some way, and this is something that, even though these great vaccinations and other measures are coming down the pipeline, for the foreseeable future, COVID will be here to stay as an unwelcome guest. And it is definitely affecting us. And so what I'm going to help people with today is not only determining their comfort level with the virus and in terms of gathering, and whether they choose to gather or not, and how they choose to negotiate that aspect of their holidays, but also helping them sort of determine their comfort level. And boy, there's been an incredible amount of social unrest in this past year as well. There's been an incredible amount of political unrest. And family time and connections, these things as well are very, very stressful. Family dynamics, in my understanding of them, and working with so many people over my professional experiences, that boy, there is nothing quite like stepping through like the doorway, and stepping back into a family dynamic just with the snap of a finger there. I might snap my fingers a couple times in this just to really evoke, this happens so quickly. It can be very, very hard to pinpoint, hey, when did I become the little sister again? When did I become um, this disempowered figure within this big dynamic? I'm an adult. I'm used to living my adult life, and I'm used to my independence and all my growth. And with a lot of people and what they report, that can sort of go out the window, right? When we step back into our family dynamic, into family time and those connections. And so I want in this first sort of in determining your comfort level to sort of start, we're wading into the issue here. We're sort of starting to determine like, okay, where's my comfort level with the virus? Where's my comfort level with political talk, social unrest, with my family? But then sort of moving us into understanding and growing more of our awareness and how do we navigate these points of discomfort in terms of what are the hot spots that we are identifying by approaching these issues, and what do you become aware of, and then what do you do with that awareness. If we are not aware, and we slip into a disempowering dynamic, that is an automatic response that can happen. And how that can affect us is we can feel this sense of dread, we can feel this sense of perhaps loathing, resentment. All these things can come up because we're simply not aware that, boy, when I talk to my dad, when I talk to my mom, when I'm in their presence, I'm slipping into more of like my child self. I'm slipping into more of parts that I'd rather leave behind, parts that I've tried to develop away from. And if we're not aware that that happens, we can become very disempowered to that process. And so at the baseline, I want people to be able to help cultivate their awareness, help cultivate, what is the map in terms of these hotspots, and how can I have some basic navigation around them to be able to neutralize some of these hotspots to make them not maybe so hot. But ultimately, what I really like to work with people is that, well, if we become aware, what stresses us, if we have we can grow some influence in terms of how do we navigate these situations and some competency there, then how can we realize a connection within our family that we actually want to have? How do we connect? How do we connect with ourselves? How do we connect with our loved ones? How can we sort of grow something that empowers us versus this empowers us? And how can we understand that our participation in that is extremely critical, but how satisfactory that can be for us over time? And so these are sort of the three main areas of what I want to talk about today, in the short time that we have together, and we'll sort of see where we get to. Okay, and sort of moving to that first place. I'll take a sip here. And sort of determining our comfort level. Okay, let me get caught up with these slides. All right, here. So determining your comfort level. And so I think the first and foremost on what is on everybody's mind is how are we going to be navigating these COVID-19 concerns? Already seeing articles out of, a lot of people are traveling. They're putting out, more restrictive elements in terms of, limiting how many households can gather, things of that nature. But people are simply not really engaging with those protocols. People are sort of doing what they're wanting to do right now. We have these fixed time periods of typically the traditional American holidays are Thanksgiving and then Christmas. So we have these fixed times for these gatherings that we need to sort of understand and negotiate. What are the risk factors here in terms of COVID-19 concerns, especially in terms of, are there any, just asking those basic questions like, hey, is there anybody in my family right now that is at risk for COVID? Like if they contract COVID, do they have a lung issue? Do they have a pre-existing condition? Do they have a complicating factor that can really exacerbate the symptoms or complicate recovery? How much do we really need to do to protect this person? Do I have a friend that's in that state that I like to see, or maybe if I go home that I like to see over the holidays? And also understanding what is that family member's sort of assessment of the situation if they are at risk, and what is their choice in the matter? Because a lot of the things that I'm hearing in terms of patients that are struggling with this question right now is that they're worried that they're going to get themselves into a situation where they're asymptomatic and they accidentally transmit the disease to a loved one and they end up passing away. But we also need to understand that this is not purely our responsibility right here, and that this is a negotiation between parties. We're all sort of adults in this situation. And if someone who is at risk chooses to be at a family gathering, to me, that is a risky situation, that is might be a little bit foolhardy, but that is also that person's choice. Is that person choosing, I would rather take this risk and spend my time with my family and have some sense of normalcy. As an adult, as a clinician, I'm like, you know what, if you're an adult, you have the freedom to make your choice, but we also need to accept the responsibilities for those choices. So let's say if you're a person and you're going home, and if someone who's severely at risk is choosing to put themselves in that place of risk, and you choose to not participate in that situation, that's totally fine as well. And so this is all about right now just asking ourselves this question of what are these risk factors in terms of COVID-19 concerns? Who's going to be at the party? Who's going to be at the gathering? How do I navigate that situation? And how can I really just determine what's reasonable here for me and my loved ones? And understanding that, if we choose to not observe with our family, with our friends, there's likely going to be some blowback. Not everyone is going to be okay with that choice. Some people might scoff at it. Some people might say this. Some people might say that. And that's totally fine, and that's to be expected. How can we prepare ourselves for that? Again, we need to determine what is reasonable and then make decisions based off of that so we can feel a sense of not certainty, but a sense of continuity between, what our intuitive elements are telling us, what we think is right and wrong, and sort of just going with that and following that a little bit to make sure that we're always in check with our internal thoughts and feelings, and we're able to live in an authentic way, and we're also able to live that way under some duress, under some pressure as well, and to be able to move through those maybe difficult situations. And so to wade into this a little bit further, just using COVID-19 as a concern, but I want to expand it into some more common stressors over the holidays. But what are the connections, let's say, in terms of the political unrest that's happening? Politics and Thanksgiving, politics and Christmas, things that don't really go together. Social unrest and social ideas during Christmas and Thanksgiving, things that don't really go together. Things that usually end up in fighting, things that end up in a lot of instability within the family dynamics. So I want those of you listening right now to ask yourself the question of, what are these connections, where maybe the political sphere comes up, maybe social issues come up, or situations that can really create some stress. And how much are you feeling stressed? Is that stress coming right now? How is this stress activated within your body? How does this stress show up in your body? What's our body telling us right now? Are these thoughts in terms of anxious rumination of, I was on the radio yesterday with Scott Wiley talking about, an imaginary figure of Uncle Bob, talks about politics at the Thanksgiving dinner. Do I have rumination in terms of my thoughts of, oh dear, like Uncle Bob's just going to be raving about this or that, and no one can really have a conversation with him? And how is this, just as an example of how does this stress activate and show up in my thoughts? How does this stress show up in my feeling states? Do I feel maybe a sense of dread? Do I feel maybe sad or disempowered? Do I have that sort of turning or tightness in my stomach? Maybe I feel like my stomach is dropping just thinking about Thanksgiving dinner. Maybe I feel a tightness in my chest, or I feel my shoulders closing. These classic sort of indicators of, I feel like there's some type of threat happening in the environment right now that my body is telling me. It's telling me that my sympathetic nervous system is engaging a little bit here. But again, just another example of investigating, okay, well, what are these connections or situations? What am I thinking about them right now? How is this stress now showing up in my body and mind? And to start utilizing and understanding that, okay, well, when I think about this situation, perhaps this stress is sort of a signal of disconnection. This stress is a signal that something is wrong right now, perhaps, that I'm not fully or consciously aware of in this moment. And we can start to sort of cultivate our awareness around, okay, well, when just even like greeting Uncle Bob, I might feel pretty stressed. I might feel pretty disempowered already. And how can I maybe prepare myself for that? Because if we're able to start cultivating our awareness, and this is, I'm really pulling from like more of the mindful perspective here, I can start to really disidentify. I can start to sort of take this step back, right now of, well, if I can be aware that this is happening right now I'm not going to be identified with that feeling. Now it's not going to be just pulling me right down the valley. I could at least observe myself and watch things happen and understand and have some predictability that, boy, my body feels really uncomfortable around Uncle Bob. Uncle Bob has been pinching my cheek since I've been in the second grade, and I just hate it. I don't like it. I don't like being in his presence, and he's not really attuned to me right now. I feel pretty disconnected in front of him. Maybe I've told my mom, told my dad, told Uncle Bob, and had it out with him a couple times over how he treats me. But just really understanding that, hey, my body is reacting right now, and to understand that this might be protecting me right now. Just growing again, growing. I don't want to get too caught on the details here, and I want to talk more about the dynamics, but understanding that when our body signals us something, and if we can read and be aware of that signal, that gives us, and through awareness, that gives us the power of making a choice in that moment, and to understand that we have sovereignty and influence about how we feel and think. And just because we're feeling maybe something strong doesn't mean we need to totally identify with that feeling in that moment. We don't need to be sucked into that feeling. We can say simply that I am feeling angry, or I am feeling sad, I am feeling stressed, versus enacting that stress, really getting in that anger, starting to react to that. I'm really honing in on that difference there, but how critical that difference can really be in terms of how we experience a situation. And so this sort of determining our comfort level right now is, how are we starting to wade in to what is stressing us out? How are we starting to investigate that to grow our initial awareness points? And our next slide here is going to help us start, okay, what are we going to do to start navigating these points of discomfort? What are we going to do to maybe start neutralizing some of these hot spots within our connections, within our difficult family dynamics? And understanding that, boy, that's that real win at that point. If we can't make things good, we can at least make them less bad. We can feel empowered through that. And a lot of times people don't understand that in terms of their progression, let's say in individual therapy. And we're starting in the valley right here, and I'll point out a lot of progress in terms of, wow, that's amazing progress. And then someone will say, well, I never should have been down there in the first place. I never should have been feeling that or doing that in the first place. But progress to me is you're making the climb, and it's same if we're climbing up the valley is the same to me as if we're climbing up the mountain. And so just to help us sort of understand that context in terms of, you know if we're making things go from bad to neutral, what a point of progress we're making, how satisfied we should really feel about that, and how empowered we should feel in terms of, hey, I'm not so disempowered. I had a neutral experience versus the past 20 years. I've had pretty bad experiences within my family dynamics. And what in getting from bad to neutral is how we get from neutral to good. It doesn't go from all the way, can never really swing that full way. It needs to be a logical progression with that. So I'm sort of tangenting with some of these points here, but that first slide being determining your comfort level, being, okay, we're starting to wade in, we're starting to feel towards some of these hot spots within the family dynamic, and we can just start with those connections with those direct family members right now. We can begin to just map this out, and this is going to be different for every single person listening to this right now. But we can start mapping out in terms of our interpersonal relationships and understand, okay, well, maybe this family member upsets me a little bit. Or maybe when I'm talking with these two people, I'm on the outside of that triangle. I'm feeling pretty othered. I'm feeling like I don't belong. Or maybe there are just some very, very difficult family dynamics going on. Maybe there's, let's say, like obligatory drinking happening, or observations, or some very difficult beliefs that are held within the family that we disagree with. And so we can start to ask ourselves this question right now of what are the practical changes that we can make, in terms of how can we, in terms of being able to navigate these points of discomfort. And, one of the biggest things to me is right now, I guess, as I'm thinking some of this through, is that we have very little in terms of how we can influence someone else, especially how we can influence someone else in conflict. I mean, if we're in open conflict with another family member, there is no sort of unison or joining, and there is no sort of ability to change. It's only like, how can I hurt you more than you're going to hurt me right now, so I can win. And when we're in that fight and flight mode like that, we're really cut off from our frontal lobe anyway. But we don't have to necessarily assert ourselves to make changes. We can assert ourselves in a much more healthy way in terms of setting a boundary, giving that person a choice and saying, like, hey, when you bring up this, I feel like that really hurts my feelings and you're not taking me into consideration here. Or, hey, when I see you, I notice that when we get to talking about politics, that we just end up getting in an argument, and that's not really how I want to spend this time together. And so, just understanding what are some of these practical changes we can make in terms of how we can communicate and maybe assert ourselves within our environment, versus in terms of versus how can we think that we can be responsible for changing the viewpoint of another. A lot of viewpoints are very based in people's temperaments or personality traits. They end up being a lot more inborn than people really think they are, in terms of them making a choice to believe these things. And a lot of times it's helpful just to accept that person where they're at, and then to sort of look for the ways that we actually want to connect. But I'm skipping a little bit ahead here, but we can sort of determine, what can we control with this? Okay, if this person has a very difficult dynamic, and we've had this dynamic for a long time, well, what can I control about the situation? Maybe I can just simply control and how much I might feed into this, and that again is really watching. Okay, what's my awareness point of this hot spot right now? How hot is this spot? How much is this maybe drawing me into these difficult moments of engagement where I might be getting into a reactionary state? Would it be good, maybe, let's say, for example, to maybe put some distance in between you and that person? Um, and there are plenty, like one of the guided meditations I enjoy doing with people, with like bilateral stimulations, like we can literally like create a shield, and visualize that. Or we can sort of put and visualize us putting distance in between that person. And what that is, like, those details don't really matter as much, but we're empowering ourselves through taking an action in that moment. What can we control in that moment? What can we do to help neutralize this hotspot a little bit more? And again, here, better doesn't have to be perfect. Better can be that, an argument started, but I excused myself from it. Better can be, hey, I was able to sort of understand that I was starting to get sucked in right now, but I, tactfully said, like, oh man, like, Aunt Sue needs help with this, and I'm just gonna go over here right now. I can just disengage. I don't need to feed into this dynamic, even though I feel like I might be getting pulled into that. So if we can start just again building our awareness of where these hotspots are within the family, where these hotspots are within our connections, we can start making these little practical changes that can sort of create more of the dynamic of being aware and utilizing that awareness to empower us in our relational environment to say, okay, I know this X situation bothers me this much typically. I can just go ahead and try to navigate around that to at least neutralize it. I can maybe choose that, hey, these two family members really upset me. Maybe I can just choose to go over here and to connect with these other family members a little bit more. And I think what that sort of comes into this last slide here in terms of understanding. Oh, I'm a little discombobulated here already. Mhm. In terms of, well, if we know how to become aware, if we know how that awareness affects us in our mind and body, if we know and can reasonably forecast where these hot spots are going to be, then we can understand that how can I create or cultivate, how can I realize these connections that I really want? And how can I take some practical steps towards those connections? And so, what I want people to understand here, in the metaphor I like to use with patients, is that families and our relational dynamics to me, and I think in how we will be looking at these maybe in 100 or 200 years, is how we all sort of look at the Wild West like 150 years ago. We're like, wow, a lot of that stuff was very unrefined. That was very intense. And they could have really avoided a lot of conflict there. And it's sort of silly to look back at some of those things. But I think in terms of how I see a little bit behind the veil, in terms of what goes on behind the scenes, these same sort of attacks, these really nasty interactions, the acceptability in terms of being so connected with a family member, being so bound by kinship, but then the containment and the acceptability within family units for just really disparaging open conflict, creating a very unsafe environment. To me, that is like that. This is like the metaphor of a garden versus a forest. And a forest is more of an area where this is sort of like the law of the jungle. Like, it's a very brutal place to really understand. And there is no real intentional cultivation. Things are working against each other and balancing each other naturally. But that also means that, there are these very stark winners, these very stark losers, and things can be tipped out of balance very quickly within a forest. Versus, let's say, a garden, and understanding that there's a lot of intention put behind a garden. There's a lot of intention and energy in creating aesthetic and containers for beauty within that space. And we're cultivating specific things that are desirable for us. And we're also sort of disregarding or de-escalating or eliminating more harmful or things we don't like weeds, parasitic bugs. I don't know, things that will eat what you want to eat. But we're really able to create this thing out of intention versus this thing that's just sort of wild and brambly over here. And that's not to say that family dynamics without intention can't be beautiful. There are plenty of families that are like that. But we also know that most families are in that sort of, they're not in that black or white place. They're in that sort of gray area of, there are a lot of good things about the family, but boy, there are a lot of dark things that happen within that family as well. And so in understanding how we can realize connection is understanding that principle of, with intention and time, and with structuring of communication, I can create, more empowering feelings. I can create more empowering interactions and connective experiences if I put a lot of effort behind that over time, and if that effort is also reciprocated from my environment as well. So we can just start asking ourselves that question in terms of intrapersonally of how do we like to connect? How do we connect with ourselves? And what is desirable about that? One of the easiest sort of pop psychology ways to understand this that I actually love to work with, just based on cultivating different dynamics, not necessarily within the details, but are the four love languages. I think that's been a fantastic way that I've seen a lot of just like younger couples understand what their love language is. Um, and how they can, intentionally please that other person, so we can both of our needs can get met, and that we also know that we're fulfilling each other's needs, that there's that conscious awareness factor, which brings out more levels of vulnerability, more levels of risk, but also brings out more reward within that typically as well. So how do we can start by asking ourselves, like, how do we like to connect with ourselves? Like, do I just like to spend maybe quality time with myself? Do I like to get myself a gift? um do I like times of like good physical touch in terms of like a massage, a spouse, an intimate partner? Do I like to just perhaps take a hot bath, to get some of these great like sort of body feelings, and taking care of holding myself in that way? But also, when we start understanding that about ourselves, we can communicate that within to our environment. And we can also start asking people, like, what are things that you like? Understanding their interests, understanding how different people in our family like to connect. What are our family stories that we maybe like? What are the experiences that we like to have and derive meaning with each other? What are those things? How can I maybe start creating some of those situations, or creating these bonds with each other, and really putting intention behind it, so it's just not left up to chance or circumstance, or this depending on what and who's in what mood at what time. And so when we understand that, hey, I can sort of cultivate my relationship with myself, over time. I can cultivate and be intentional about the relationships within my family. We can also use that to help us navigate difficult relationships with family members, and understanding that this example of Uncle Bob really is just very difficult with politics, and he still likes to grab on your cheek there. And we can help, but we can also understand about him that maybe we had this great camping trip growing up. Maybe Uncle Bob showed me how to change oil in a vehicle, or change a tire. Maybe Uncle Bob has been helpful, or he tries to connect in some way, even if it might be funny or silly, or you don't might not understand it. But how can I go ahead and affirm Uncle Bob in the things that we do connect with? How can I be curious about some of Uncle Bob's sort of interests, even if they're not interesting to you, but just so we can have this intention behind it of how can I cultivate and start influencing and feeling empowered, and sort of taking charge of this dynamic, versus just waiting for his mind just to drift to the conflict areas. And if we can take some control of that, we can find as well that when that trust is built with that person, and that person really understands that you have a very authentic level of engagement with them that they probably don't experience on a regular basis, my guess is that there's going to be less of a likelihood for them to drift into that conflictual zone, because in them feeling affirmed, they will probably just want to keep that feeling and not want to drift to a feeling of disconnection within that. So just a little example there of how we can change a dynamic possibly. It's not going to work with every situation, but again, we could at least maybe try to work and have that goal to work it to a neutral point. And so when we can sort of understand that, how do we connect? How do others in our family connect? Now, I touched on this a little bit of understanding, like, what's my family story? What's my family story, perhaps? And how can I build on that? What are our shared values here? What do we understand about ourselves as a people? And how can I maybe engage with that a little bit more? And to start like interweaving that more into the narrative and more into those experiences with each other. Again, starting to look on more of like a bigger level within the family here of like, what are our rituals within the family? Are there any rituals maybe from the old world or from the culture that we come from that could be good to maybe re-inject into the family dynamic? What are these things that make us us versus other families? How can I embrace that? How can I help to grow that? But in the interest of how can I help to just cultivate these connections here? How can I be aware? How can I utilize that awareness as a platform into a place that I want to get to, versus being taken whichever way that we're going to be taken? That that place we're taking might be a good place, But more often than not, that place can be a place of disempowerment within a family. It can come up to the level of re-traumatization. It can be really, really hard, like to have a lot of people can experience a holiday hangover in that way as well. And so, just some basic ideas here in understanding and in acknowledging the difficulty of this holiday season, however anyone is spending it, growing our awareness within that, navigating with our awareness. But ultimately, the lesson I think of how can I realize and be intentional about creating these connections that have this sense of beauty like a garden, in that we focus on these areas because we know we're both not perfect people, but at least we can share and grow in this way and get this experience that we want to get from each other, and to really grow that garden within ourselves, and to realize that sort of beauty through that connection is one of the greatest things I like about being a therapist. It looks like we have a question here. Let's see here. And Allison says, acknowledging our feelings and intentions and reasonable expectations are powerful points. Um, is bilateral stimulation normally a series of sessions fairly close together? So bilateral stimulations, Allison, let's say if you were to choose to do that, either come in like session or consultation or like on your own. So that would bilateral stimulation is known as more of an enhancement in terms of strengthening neural networks and connections. So if we were to go on a guided imagery exercise right now, let's say a classic of EMDR, a safe and calm place. If we're able to create that place of safety, hone in on that image and the sensory details of that, hone in on the sounds and the sights, the smells, and then we were to add bilateral stimulation on top of that, not only that strengthens that connection that we have to that place and that association, but it also starts to enhance that sensory information more. So I hope that answers your questions. Bilateral stimulation is used in multiple ways, both for enhancing what we call resources, but also to help us with direct trauma reprocessing as well. And you can let me know in the chat here if you have any further questions. Okay, great. Awesome. And thank you for the question as well. Very good question there. And so just like to start wrapping it up here, we're at 42 minutes in terms of understanding the general benefits of psychotherapy. Having an experienced guide, in talking a little bit about my background earlier, I like to tell people I've seen it all, I've heard it all. There is nothing that you're going to really surprise me with at this point in my career. But also just helping to have a guide in the sense of, I'm stepping in here with you, and I'm helping you really to learn from within. I'm helping you to come to your own conclusions and these points of connection. And I'm also here to really help you to regain or strengthen yourself through this process, through connection, because human beings, I say it over and over again with people, we're interdependent creatures. We are really stronger together. And the more connected that we feel in ourselves and with another person, the more we're going to be exploratory within our environment, the more positive risks we're going to take, like positive development we're going to have and want to push towards. And we're just not going to have that sort of weight of isolation and that scarcity feeling holding us back within that. So psychotherapy has a lot of benefits, especially with more relational approach that I have as well. And in conclusion here, I have some strong beliefs of, we can and we should improve our emotional well-being, because in the end, if we can improve ourselves, we can help others. We can be there for each other. So we can help people brace more. We become stronger overall. I'm a big believer in that. And this is all really hard because it is. We choose to enter into this pain. It's never easy. My hands can callous here, but emotions that I experience will never callous over it. Sadness is always going to feel really sad no matter what. I know I can move through it. I can know it's not permanent. I can know that I have a lot of benefit and curiosity about it, but boy, does that just really hurt every single time. So it's hard because it is, and I respect anybody who comes in to come through the process And it's just, this is a good time, I think, in our culture just to be really frank about our emotional health, to get professional treatment if needed. A lot of great information I see out there, but always good to get with a qualified professional because just like a personal trainer, they're going to get you to a place a lot faster than you'd probably get on your own. Um, and I would never say that someone just going to a gym and figuring it out can never get in shape. That simply would not be true. But there is a lot of benefit from working with a qualified professional as well, I would have to say. So, in conclusion, here, we're on Your Health Matters. I believe Dr. Trinka is on it as well. I was just on this past Monday. We can expect, a different practitioner on every single week. Telehealth is available at integrated health systems if we're not comfortable in terms of the virus right now. People get their temperature taken, protocols are in place in terms of doing our part in stopping the spread. But telehealth is always available for consult and sessions. And awesome. And so you can click in the link here in terms of getting a free 30-minute consultation. Or you can go ahead and call in. Thank you for joining me this evening, everyone, and you all have a great Thanksgiving or holiday season here. And I hope you stay safe and stay healthy. And so I will sign off with that and just take care. All right.